Welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Dr. Vivian Carlin. Between our two households, we're navigating life with 10 children, so we know how chaotic parenting can be. As Johns Hopkins-trained pediatricians, we also know the science. Our goal is to bring you the best of both worlds, medically sound, trustworthy advice, and practical, real-world insights as we dive into the trials and triumphs of parenting. Please note this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. As such, child abuse prevention has been very much on our minds. Today, we will be discussing prevention of childhood sexual abuse. Some of this content may be upsetting to listeners. Today, we will be highlighting one context in which childhood sexual abuse can occur, which involves grooming of the child by an adult in their circle. However, please be reminded that childhood sexual abuse can occur in many different contexts. Hi, I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin, and on this episode, we are going to talk about sexual abuse awareness and what we can do as parents to help make our children aware so that they can protect themselves and so that we can help protect them. This is another adverse childhood event, sexual abuse is, so we want it to be on our radar and discuss what we can do to help keep our children safe.
No, this is a much needed topic, and I think it's every parent's worst nightmare to think that their child might undergo some sort of sexual abuse.
I work at different places with children, so at church, at summer camps, and on every single one of those, I do every year a sexual abuse prevention training. And it crossed my mind this year as I was doing my training to prepare for my summer camp job. I was thinking, gosh, this is all information that parents need to know so they know how to talk to their children. The first thing we need to do is we need to understand the scope of the problem. So on the CDC website, they say that approximately 1 in 4 girls or 1 in 20 boys in the United States experience childhood sexual abuse. And that's very similar to statistics on the AAP Bright Futures website. I think they quote 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys. So really common. The other thing is that about 90% of child sexual abuse is perpetrated by somebody who's known and trusted by the child or child's family members. So sexual abuse training in the past decade or two has changed in the sense that we've become more aware that, sexual abusers often are somebody who is somewhat in your circle, right? Like, let me give you an example. So I have a friend who is a physician's assistant, and she did her PA school back in the 90s. And she told me this story once that one of the questions during one of the lectures that she remembers is somebody said, describe for me what you think of when I say somebody who abuses children sexually. And, all these people were throwing out descriptions, and she raised her hand and she was like, I have a vision of a man in a 3-piece suit with a tie. And everybody kind of looked at her funny. And the background for that story is that she had a family member who was convicted of sexual abuse, and he was a highly, highly educated professional. And she said in that moment, she was like, guys, like, the sexual abuser is not the homeless guy on the street. It's people that you interact with day to day and you have no idea. That's why it's so difficult and why we have to be so vigilant with our children.
Right. Absolutely.
So I think a lot of the recent, teaching on sexual abuse has us as adults being aware of what's called the grooming process.
I haven't heard about this grooming process. Tell me about it.
Yeah. So oftentimes along this line that a lot of sexual abuse occurs from people that are exposed to your children, like family members, relatives, friends, teachers, coaches, babysitters. The idea is that often there's an adult who, for whatever reason, kind of can single out a child, that they have some type of special need or that they have some type of special interest, and they can develop a relationship with that child so that then it becomes very natural that the child is spending time alone with them, right? And then that child is alone with that adult and nobody necessarily doesn't raise any flags for anybody. And then that adult has an established relationship with the child. And that is often when abuse starts occurring, right? Because there's been an established trust between the child and the adult, as well as the adult and the parents. And no, it's not on anybody's radar. Okay, so super scary because we all, can relate to this idea of who are all of the adults in our children's circle that we trust and that we want them to trust, right? Right? So
It
go
brings
ahead.
me back to some of those episodes we've had in the past where, we've given advice for if we're struggling with a child for some reason or another in a certain phase of their development, that we want the village to come in and help, right? We're looking for help and guidance and maybe a trusted adult figure to connect with our child if we're having trouble connecting at that moment. So it almost is like we need to be on alert at the same time. If we're not aware of it, it could happen right under our noses, right?
Absolutely right. So, the thrust of what we're going to say here is how important it is to be talking to your children.
Okay.
Because what we need to do is equip our children to understand that they are in control of their body, that they know how to tell an adult if something happens that they don't feel comfortable with, that they know like that if something happens that doesn't feel right to them, that they feel uncomfortable or scared or confused, that they should go to an adult, that they know they should never be told to be keeping secrets from their trusted adults, that we need to be equipping our children with that kind of knowledge. So let me give you a couple of examples of this idea of grooming specifically. So in 2024, there was a documentary called Quiet on the Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. And it was actually looking more in depth at the culture of Nickelodeon and the kids that were hired in to be childhood actors of Nickelodeon. Well, one of those actors who's now an adult, when he was a child, his name is Drake Bell. He comes on to that show and he talks about repeated sexual abuse that he experienced from Brian Peck, who was one of the dialogue coaches and very high up in the Nickelodeon culture at that time in training student actors. And that man gives just a really good description of what this process, how it evolves and what it looks like. And in this situation, this is a dialogue coach. He's on set at Nickelodeon. He's very powerful. He's very important. He takes this child under his wing and is coaching him. And it can be like months, years of time of establishing that relationship. And then as this child grows up and is a teenager, he lives very far from the set. And it's a natural segue into he stays overnight with this dialogue coach because he lives right next to the set and he's able to drive him. And this is a strain on the family, right? Because they live far away and he's, got this ambitious acting career. And now you've got this situation of this trusted adult to the other family members, trusted adult to the child, who is also in a little bit of a position of power because he has some control over this child's acting career. And this is when the sexual abuse started occurring. And the actor, he gives a really good description of how we can expect that to feel to children and adolescents. They feel immediately ashamed. They feel afraid when that adult is telling them, you shouldn't tell anybody. I'm so sorry. I won't do it again. Somebody's going to be mad if you tell them. They're going to be disappointed. Children and adolescents believe that. Like he was not prepared for knowing how to speak out about that until much later. Mm-hmm. So this was just a really good example of this grooming process of a trusted adult who then abused this child, who then as an adult is speaking out about what that felt like as a child and adolescent.
I mean, you hear about these in the news all the time, like the gymnastics coach and doctor's sexual abuse for the U.S. gymnastics women.
Yeah, and there's so mumuch concern about this. The AAP and their healthychildren.org actually has a handout on child sexual abuse. One of the points that they make there is that that's a great example of what happened in U.S. gymnastics, is that it doesn't just happen with sports. It can happen with any youth organization. So sports, music, church, scouting, summer camp. This is why all of these institutions that hire people like me have rigorous training that you go through for child abuse prevention. And this is a really important component of it, is that, hey, look around, right? Like, don't think like the people that were in my friend's lecture 20 years ago, that every child abuser looks just like the homeless man standing on the corner on your street. Right. That is not the case. They look just like you, and they have this propensity to child sexual abuse. And they often are very smart, like the man in Nickelodeon, like the doctor who abused the gymnasts. And they're also often master deceivers. So we also have story after story of people that have abused children and their spouse had no idea, even when it was ongoing. They completely deceived not only the community, the parents, the people that they were working for, but also their closest partners, their spouse, their family didn't know. So I think this is the message of all of this abuse training that I go through again and again is we need to be on guard and on alert because you cannot recognize or pick or who you think is an abuser. You just need to be careful. And I feel like that prevention really starts. The first line is we have to educate our children so that they, should they ever be faced in a situation that makes them uncomfortable, they know what to do. Let's talk about some of the main points that you can take when you have a discussion with your child about sexual abuse and how to be aware and to prevent it.
So why don't we review? We talked a little bit about what to tell your child, how to talk to your children. Can you give us some specific advice on that?
Yeah, so I will point people to, there is another AAPhealthychildren.org called Preventing Abuse, specifically talking about this. And it does highlight the most important thing we need to be doing is talking to our children, because as vigilant as we are in trying to keep them safe, we need other adults in their life. I want my child to have other adults in their life. I need my village. I need other adults helping my child, right? And I can try to monitor that and do that in as safe of ways as possible, as I should as a parent. But ultimately, I want that added layer of protection where my child, who is on the front lines, out there by themselves, at school, at summer camp, at whatever it is, that they know and understand the risk and know how to react if there's a situation. So first, we want them to know that they are the one in control of their body. Nobody needs to be touching their body without consent. Right? And part of that is even at a very young age, we should teach them the anatomic names for their genitalia, for their private parts, so that they can communicate that they understand what the actual names are. And I think you and I are probably at benefit of this. I mean, my kids know if they ask me any question about sex or whatever, I will just, wherever we are, just answer their question. Dinner table. My one daughter has this memory of being in the drive-thru at Starbucks and we ordered and the younger daughter was like, hey, where do babies come from? And I answered her all while we're going through before I get my drink, right? Like, I'm just like, sure, you bring up the question, I'm going to talk about that. And I think that's because I've spent so many years of my career telling teenagers who I just met in the emergency room about sex and the dangers and the risks and how to be careful and consent and all of that. Like, I just naturally talk about these things. So that's part of it, is that we should establish communication with our children. This isn't taboo to talk about. They know the anatomic names of their body parts. They can ask questions and we have like this established communication. Another important part is establishing, well, who is allowed to look at your private parts? So certainly when mom or dad are, they're still young and they're giving you a bath and helping you clean, that's okay, right? When you go to the doctor's office, it's okay if somebody is there with you. I always tell children when I'm seeing them, hey, I need to examine your private area. That's okay because mom is here and I'm a doctor and it's important for me to check that because of your health. But nobody else should be doing that without mom or dad present, right?
Yes, I say something similar.
They should learn it's okay to say no when somebody asks to touch you or do something in a way that makes you uncomfortable, that you are in control. I think it's important to sort of have this discussion of what is an okay touch and what's not, right? Like when somebody is touching you in a place on your body and that makes you feel uncomfortable, scared, confused, you have these private areas on your body, that's not okay. If that happens and you feel uncomfortable, you should always know that you need to tell an adult. It's super important for us to tell our children that no adult should ever be telling you to keep a secret that doesn't feel right, right? So, yes, there are times that you keep a secret. Like you went with grandma and you bought this special gift for dad and you want to save it a surprise until his birthday. Yes, that's a secret that is okay. That feels good. That is okay. But if something happens and it feels bad to you and an adult is saying you should keep this secret from your parents or from whoever your trusted adults are, that should never happen. No adult should ever be, no adult or child should ever be telling you to keep a secret from your trusted adults. To go a step further, that if an adult is telling you that to keep a secret, that you should know you have a responsibility to tell an adult that can help you. Obviously we want to establish with our kids, if something does happen that makes you uncomfortable, it's never your fault, right? And I think part of that is, even as parents, we always want to believe our child. When our child comes to us, we don't want to shut them down. We don't want to say, oh, you're overreacting. We always want to hear what they have to say and believe them, right? Mm-hmm. And then I think it's important also in establishing what adults can you talk to. Obviously, you can talk to, obviously you can talk to your parents or your guardian, the people that you're closest to. But there are situations where kids, adolescents, even as adults, when things happen, we want to protect the people that are closest to us because we feel afraid about how badly it's going to make them feel. And so we're inhibited to tell our parents, for example. So who are other adults that are safe to tell? Who is the administrator at school that you could tell? Who is the person, if you're at summer camp, like who is the person that you should go talk to? Prepare them. If something is making you uncomfortable, I want to empower you to have the confidence to go tell somebody. And who are generally those safe people that you could go tell? Like, I think these are just these conversations, ongoing conversations with our children where we're checking in with them and not just asking, hey, has anything ever happened to you? Which is an important conversation to have, but actually equipping them as if they're doing their own training, just like I do training to go work at summer camp or school, that they're doing their own training for this is how you equip yourself to be safe going to school or to summer camp, where you will have access to a lot of people that you're just meeting for the first time.
No, those are all really good tips. And if you've come into a situation where you're suspicious that something has happened to your child, the next step is for you as the parent to report it to either the pediatrician, going to the emergency room, and having the doctors there start the child abuse workup and investigation. Those are the steps that you take as a parent if you are suspicious that something has happened. The American Academy of Pediatrics HealthyChildren.org site has a good description of what are indicators, like red flags, that they might be suspicious that something has happened to their child. They call it the signs of stress in children that may be an indicator of sexual abuse. Sometimes children withdraw from family and friends. You see this inward withdrawal from their child for no explained reason. Sometimes you begin to see some school struggles where they were not struggling before and suddenly they're having more difficulty. There can be a show of anger and aggression, like a lashing out, a temper and a short fuse that they never saw before. There can be a child who was once very trusting suddenly avoiding adults or avoiding certain adults, like, I don't like that person, or I don't want to be around that person for no apparent reason. So that should be a red flag. And then obviously, if the child has any symptoms of any sexually transmitted infections, then that can be a sign that something has happened. So when caregivers spot these signs, it's a good opportunity to begin that conversation with their child, asking them in a very open way if anything is going on in their life or if something is bothering them.
Yeah, I think in conclusion, the take-home message is that we really need to be talking to our children, to equip them, to empower them, so that they're really on the front line of preventing these things from happening to them. I think the second thing is, we've said many times on this podcast, and I stand by it, that having your village of people that support your child is very important. And I depend on unrelated adults in my circle that also care for my children, right? That I know want the best for my children and are coming alongside me to help raise them. And those people are invaluable to me. But I need to, as a parent, be very much on guard about who has alone time with my child. What adults have my child one-on-one or alone. And that's why a lot of the policies that are in place at schools and camps, et cetera, never allow an adult to be one-on-one with a child. There needs to be three people at all times, right?
Hopefully in this episode, we've discussed in our series of adverse childhood experiences, the unfortunate adverse childhood experience of sexual abuse in children.
Yeah, we encourage you to have these conversations with your children. We've given you some ideas on how to talk to them and what to say, but honestly, 99% of the battle is just talking to your child at all about this, opening those doors of communication. And we wish you strength as you go forward in this aspect of parenting.
This is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.